In this video, I'm going to show you a traditional method of cutting a centered tenon, and that's done by making one pass, flipping the stock, making another pass, and then using the jig as a crosscut sled to remove the material on either side. We'll get started here by making a few score marks to prevent as much tear out as possible. Across the faces and here on the corners. Alright, now we'll go get our blade depth set. Right about there looks pretty good. So the thickness of this stock is 710 thousandths, and I'm going to shoot for a centered 1/4 inch tenon, which means I'm going to need to have 230 thousandths taken off on either side. So what I need to do to calibrate for that centered 1/4 inch tenon is figure out where this face of the stock just engages this side of the blade, set that as the 0 point, and then move the stock over about 230 thousandths, make that pass, and I can unclamp, flip, reclamp, make the next pass, and that'll create the centered tenon. And so what I'll do next is I'll cut the blade on, run the stock up to it, kiss the side of the blade, and as soon as I hear that blade engage the wood, I'll set that as my 0 point. I've found that that's a lot more accurate for finding a 0 point than just trying to calibrate a 0 point off the side of a blade that isn't spinning. And the reason for that is once the blade is spinning, sometimes it cuts slightly wider than its actual kerf, and you can also get a little bit of deflection like this if you try to calibrate against a blade that isn't spinning. And this is just one method I use to calibrate a 0 point. I think it's a little bit quicker, but there's definitely several other ways to calibrate 0 points. You don't have to do it this way. Alright, so I'll start the saw up, calibrate the 0 point where it engages the face, set the caliper to 0, move it over by 230 thou, and then make that first pass for the tenon. That's my 0 point. Move it over by 230 thou. There's 200, 210, 220, 230 right there. And then I'll go ahead and lock in the carriage stops on both sides of the stock carriage here on the operator's side, and that'll make sure the stock stays in that exact same position when I flip it. Just flip the stock around, reclamp. All right, now we'll get set up to position the stock against the jig like this and use the jig as a crosscut sled to remove the remaining material. And now I'll install this clamping guide, which will reference this end of the stock, and then I can move the stock carriage to micro adjust the stock toward the blade so I can sneak up on my score line and get that cut exactly where I want it. So I'll start with the stock positioned against the jig to where it's fairly close to where I want to make the cut. Then go ahead and install the clamping guide. I'll grab my adjustable square. I just like to clamp these on relatively square. And right there is low enough for this application. Now you can see that I can use the stock carriage, move this piece of stock back and forth, get it exactly where I want it, then I'll lock in the carriage stops again, and I'll be good to go to make both passes and remove both sides of the remaining material. Go ahead and crank the blade down. Where I'll remove that entire piece of material. And I'll start just a little bit heavy, and then I'll sneak up right to my score line. Just a little bit more. I'll try about 20 thousandths there. About another 10 thousandths. And you can see I'm just kissing my score line, so I'll call that good enough. Lock in these carriage stops. Be sure not to move the stock carriage. Just flip the stock over, make the pass on the other side. And I'll have to say that's pretty rare for it to spit away loose material if it's not pinched against a fence or something on the other side. But it shot this piece about 15 feet back across the shop. That's always a risk whenever you end up with a loose piece near the blade when it's spinning. But the good thing about the jig is you can always keep your entire body to one side of the blade when you're making a pass and creating loose material. So we'll check the width of our tenon and see how close we got to 1/4 inch. So we ended up very close to 1/4. That looks right on, maybe a few thousandths shy. So we're probably within 2 or 3 thousandths of 1/4 inch. So definitely close enough for most woodworking.